Hi, everybody. Welcome to the I Am 1-2 podcast with your host, Christopher Cohn. I'm here always with my best friend, Dan the Man, also known as Lieutenant Dan in the cockpit. Say hello, Dan.
How's everybody doing? This is Dan.
And we are starting a new endeavor today. And if you're joining us on this first episode, we welcome you and we're very excited. Dan and I have been talking about, we're both long-term in recovery, and we've been talking about how we can get the message out of addiction, recovery, tools, how to live a better life, you name it, and spread it out to more people. And especially, I'm in a position professionally where I do a group every day, and I do these things I call them edumacations. And in my edumacations, I'm trying to help take these very complicated concepts and distill them down to understandable language. And if there's one piece of feedback I've gotten from patients for, 21 years I've been in the business, they all say the same thing. I heard things in here I never heard before, and I could understand what you were saying. It just made sense to me. So that's our goal, is to help you through your path by giving you information and tools that will make it possible for you to change your life. We call this the I Am 1-2 podcast because of a phrase that came up rather organically. Any of you all watching who have been to AA or NA, I guarantee at some point in your travels, you've heard many times in the rooms, I wish my family and friends had this program, had these tools. And what a great world would it be if we all had these tools. And I believe that's what the 12 steps are meant to do. They're meant to be available to everybody. So we started meetings in Louisville, and we have 3 of them. I'll tell you about might as well now. We have a website called 12-Step Spiritual Recovery.com. You have to press the whole words. Yes, I know. 12stepspiritualrecovery.com. And we have 1 meeting in person, but 2 meetings on Zoom that anybody in the world is welcome to join us. There's a women's group only on Tuesday nights at 7:30. It's Eastern time. And there is a co-ed group tonight on Thursdays, every Thursday night at 7:30 as well. So if anybody wants to check that out, please do. But we came into this meeting and we had people coming from all walks of life. And they didn't know what to say, because in traditional 12-step groups, the walls have been kind of high to get over unless you say a particular phrase, and that is, I am an alcoholic, or I am an addict, or I am an overeater, I am a gambler. And we didn't want to label people. We want them just to be human beings who wanted tools to get better. So Dan very organically came up with this phrase one night where he just said, I am 1-2. And we said, that has a ring to it. And turns out it's actually in the big book at a certain point where Bill Wilson says, we hope our fellow will stick around to the point where he may say to himself, I think I may have what you fellows has. I think I am 1-2. So that's where that comes from. We are intending to give you a format here where we will give you a full education on a topic every week. That topic will vary from, addiction issues, recovery issues, and then also we'll have outside the box topics. We'll stretch the boundaries in here. And I'll do my little spiel, and then Dan and I will have a discussion back and forth to flesh out the topic a little bit. And after that, we want to encourage you. We will have a question and answer period where you can come in and you can send me a question about anything having to do with your life. Could be a relationship problem, a work problem, just dealing with boundaries, dealing with all the stuff that we deal with as human beings, and also particularly around addiction. Or if you have someone in your life, like we all do, that is struggling with addiction, I can help you with maybe navigating some of that. And if you want to send us those questions, I'll repeat this later in the podcast, but the email is I am 1-2, but it's the letters. Over here you see over my right shoulder, left shoulder, I am 1-2 recovery @gmail.com. I repeat, I am 1-2 recovery @gmail.com. There's a lot going on in my head being this first episode, so bear with me, folks. We are getting over the nerves, but very excited that you've joined us, and I hope this helps you in your journey called life. So let's get right to our topics. I picked 2 killer topics to start out with, both for our first 2 episodes. So this episode, we're going to talk about what is addiction. And we're going to try to flesh it out from more of a everyday language. In my profession, I'm a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor here in the state of Kentucky. And I also have a master's degree with an emphasis in addiction studies. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I joke that I've had alcoholism, dysfunction, and codependency in my life since I was in the womb. And I've also became an alcoholic addict, and I'm getting ready to celebrate 40 years of recovery in May. So if there's anybody who has a full perspective on what this disease does and what it's all about, I really have a lot of experience with this. And so that's kind of the angle I want to take, because if you get on the web, and I do this with my parents of my patients, or anybody that says, I don't understand this. It says, well, go here and read this, or go here and read this. And it's very stale. I did this last night. I looked up, what is addiction on old Google. And everything I was reading was like, oh, boring, dull. I didn't get it. Doesn't really make it real to me. So we're going to try that different angle on it while also incorporating some of the science, but on a super simple level so that you will understand what we're saying. We are living in a time where addiction is just rampant in our culture, and it's not drugs and alcohol, it's everywhere. We'll get into that in a little bit, but we have a culture that is based on pleasure, and we are getting things way too easily without much work, and then that makes us want to get more of that because of the way we're wired, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. And so almost everybody has an issue they're struggling with. Now, if they don't want to call it an addiction, I'm totally okay with that. But everybody, I've looked at my family, everybody has something that they're struggling with. So hopefully you'll be able to relate this to your own experience or whatever might be causing you trouble in your life. So unfortunately, we're still doing this today, but the number one treatment for addiction through the history of mankind has been punishment. It always has been, and it continues to be. We have more people incarcerated in the United States than most other countries combined. It's an industry. That's everything as I was taught, everything in the prison industry is regulated by corporations. So from the clothes the inmates wear to what they eat to the soap they use to the cleaning fluid that cleans the floors, every piece of it is owned by a corporation that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and somebody's making money on that. And so that's how we're treating our addicts and alcoholics today. It's pretty sad. This goes back in our history. The alcoholic addict was always a symbol of ridicule or a symbol of humor. If you go back to ancient literature, not that ancient, Renaissance age, and you look at Faust, and he was always the source of humor. In Shakespearean plays, he was the jolly good fellow that came out drunk with a big old beer stein, and he lightened the mood in the play. And we still have that today. For any of you who may have seen Andy Griffith's show, that is our good friend Otis. Every time Otis walks into the jail and locks himself up because he's drank too much, everybody laughs. But as I tell my patients, wow, nobody thinks that man is dying from a fatal disease. Nobody thinks, what about his poor family at home? What about his kids while he's spending the night in jail? And we all laugh, think it's funny. And that's the hit about addiction today. Bill Wilson wrote in the AA Big Book, we live in a world of misunderstanding and ignorance. And we still do. And despite the internet, despite Oprah Winfrey, despite all these sources of knowledge, we still live in a world where it's almost like we don't want to understand. And I tell my patients there's a reason for that. Your family and your friends are angry at you. They're hurt because we do a lot of bad things when we're sick. So they have to get over the emotional part to be able to think reasonably. That's what Mr. Spock would say in Star Trek. So punishment, judgment, and incarceration. Those are your number one treatments we have in America today for addiction. The only thing that changed for us was in the 90s. You may have lived through this. We had a huge advance in the power of computer technology. And it created the opportunity for us to look inside the human skull while the person was still alive to see what was actually going on in the mechanisms of the brain to addict the person or cause them to stay addicted. And prior to that, it's worth noting, every single piece of research that was done had to wait until the alcoholic died. And then they would cut his brain out and look at it and say, I don't understand. Why does he keep drinking? It's not a very effective way to figure out what is driving a person's sickness. So that was it. The 90s started research on a major level. And as I've been told, 20 years, 15 to 20 years for any solid, good research study to be completed. You got to get the funding, you got to set the contracts, you got to get the participants, you got to do your studies, you got to do your evaluations, you got to have it peer reviewed. And it's a big endeavor. So we're just getting to a point right now around 2015 and 2020 where we're getting all this great brain science just come down the pike. And I feed on that. When I go to trainings, I kind of lean towards those geeky brain science things because I want to know what's wrong with me. I've wanted to know that ever since I was a kid. I'm like, why am I different? Every actor alcoholic knows that feeling. And so we're getting answers today. All right, genetics do play a role in addiction, and that is proven. There are a lot of people out there that say this ain't no disease or this ain't genetic. No, it is genetic, but we're trying to refine what piece of that or how intense does that mean? Because really we're finding a lot about the role of trauma and the role of environment. And I think the way I'm leaning and what I'm hearing, I think we're leaning more towards that tricking it. So genetics sort of play the role of it's going to make you weaker or predisposed, as they call it. Your genes are going to be a little bit stronger to it. So you might have, like if you had asthma, you'd be a little bit weaker to getting illnesses in your lungs and troubles with your lungs. That's all it is when this comes to genetics. But your environments is what's going to trick it off. Because we have many people who come to my group and they'll say, well, I don't have anybody in my family that's an addict alcoholic. And I'm like, you might want to look a little deeper. And then they used to say this too when I was first training. They used to say, it skips a generation. We'll have a grandfather and then it skips and then the kids get it. It's like, did you ever consider, this is my theory, that maybe the parents hated growing up with that addict alcoholic and they vowed to never touch it? And so the kids don't know. They might be a carrier of the gene, but they just never triggered it. You have to drink and drug quite a bit to trigger this illness. So that's it. Genetics plays a role, but it's not really the most major part, I don't think, nowadays. What is the major part? I went to a great training with this Bahamian doctor. I forget how you say it. His name was Dr. Sean, and he had an excellent accent. It was so much fun to be in his training. And he said, pain and unmet needs. Pain and unmet needs. That is where addiction thrives. If you have trauma in your past, if you have hurt, if you have depression, if you have things that just demons you can't get rid of, pain. And I think this part is the part everybody undervalues, unmet needs. Most people you meet in America, if you ask them, do they absolutely love their job and can't wait to get there in the morning, not very many people are lucky enough to be able to say that. So not having a job that fulfills me, or I'm so stuck in the corporate world that I can't express myself and I'm doing just what they tell me to, that's an unmet need. Or if I have a relationship and I'm not able to speak my needs because I have codependency, or my partner's not available to me because they work too much. All of that is unmet needs. And that, I think, is a much bigger trigger for addiction to slip in the window. Because you know what? You don't have that need met? Why don't you come over here, baby? I got this bag of Cheetos, and you and I can watch Netflix tonight. Don't worry about your partner not being there. And that's where addiction comes in, particularly when it comes to this word coping. That is the number one risk factor for addiction that we understand. If you are using a substance or an activity to cope with your feelings, to cope with memories, to cope with your life the way it is, from going to a place where I like having this and this helps me do what I need to do and I like the feeling you're giving me, to I need this. That's the trick of the brain with coping, is it goes from having to I like to have this to I need to have this. So it's very, very something important factor to pay attention to. Connection is a word we talk about a lot in addiction science. This feeling of being in a world that's so scary and so big, and every human being feels this. You can't be mortal without feeling this. It's me against the world, and I'm very vulnerable in this little skin I got, and anything could happen to me. An asteroid could drop in my house, or we could go to World War III, or who knows. Everything they're pumping on the news, all this terrible stuff could happen to me. But I have total control over this connection with my dope. And if you'll notice the way people use, it's very ritualized, whether you're laying out a shot glass and you're pouring a perfect pour, or whether you're making your drink the right mix, or whether you're laying out your rig and then shooting up. This little space is mine. And that connection I have to that space makes me feel safe and secure. So we say connection is the opposite of addiction, and that is why social bonds in the programs, in any group, will save you from addiction. If you're all alone, isolated, number 2 risk factor for addiction. Number 1, coping. Number 2, isolated, alone. I tell people in my group, if you are staying at home for a 3-day weekend, that's very dangerous because your mind will start talking to you and you will not come out on the other end very well. In fact, you'll be full of paranoia. You'll be having anxiety out the wazoo, and you'll be like thinking the world's going to hell, and who cares anyway? So be careful about isolating. All right, let's moving on. Make my little notes here. So I talked earlier about this addiction epidemic we're having in our culture, and what we're finding out is the main culprit. Even though drugs and food and sex and other sources of pleasure bring endorphins into your body and other chemicals that make you feel good, we really have centered on the role of dopamine in the brain, and I'm going to explain why that takes precedent over these other chemicals. Everything we have in our society is a dopamine delivery system. If you go to the gas station, you get your cup of coffee. Cheers, everybody. And you get the little candy bar. And then you turn on your phone and you watch a TikTok video while you're getting your gas. All of those things are delivering a little hit of your brain that makes you feel good. And because of that, the brain has been historically taught dopamine is good, and when I get more dopamine, that's even better. And the problem with our society in general, we're going to go in depth on this on further episodes down the line, is that these dopamine delivery systems have gotten either A, too good at how they deliver it to us more efficiently, or they've upped the intensity of what they're delivering to us. And those are conditions that are going to increase addiction, period, end of story. All anybody has to do is look at the new marijuana and the problems that are now arising. If you will look up the problems in cities and states where marijuana is legal now, off the chain how many issues are showing up socially that they're having to deal with. Because increased access increases addiction usually. And this new marijuana is more powerful. And the delivery systems, they have vaping, they have cartridges, they have dabs, they have wax, they have all this stuff that I never got to try. And the brain doesn't know how to handle it. It's getting in there too fast. There's no defenses. So when it comes to the role of dopamine, let's explain what dopamine is. Dopamine is your feel-good chemical, and on an average day when you're just sitting here chilling out, you have about 30 to 50 nanograms of dopamine running through your system, so that if I came up to you and I said, how you doing today? You'd say, I'm good. Yeah, I'm okay. Everything's good. Your serotonin plays a major role in that, but dopamine kind of overrides it at times, especially if, let's say you go now and you go to a finest restaurant and you have one of the best meals of your life. Your dopamine might raise up to about 70 to about 100. And you're going to come out of that restaurant going, wow, that was a great meal. We need to go back there very soon. That was fantastic. Same as if you have a really good workout and you like to work out, or you have really good sex and you like sex. Your dopamine is going to be bumped up over 100 or so. And you're going to be like, we need to do that again. That was really great. Your brain's going to want to do it all the time, but you really can't physically, right? You can't eat all the time. You can't have sex all the time. You can try, but you're going to get in the hospital real soon. You take a hit of meth that you can find on the streets in any city, wherever you live, and your dopamine is going to shoot from 0 to 10,000. And this is the danger zone. If you look at that difference between 100 and 10,000, that's going to make your brain pay attention. And your brain's going to say, as I say in my group, what the F was that? We need to get us more. That was extraordinarily good. Because why? Because dopamine is my feel-good chemical. Now, here's where we take a deeper level on it. Dopamine is not just the feel-good chemical. It drives pleasure, yes, but it also drives survival, and it drives motivation. And right now, all the science I'm hearing is really centering on motivation as the key for why people are getting addicted. Let's go back to when we were living in caves, okay? And we didn't know about all these great dopamine delivery systems like cell phones and internet and sex and gambling and everything. So let's say this caveman comes out of his cave in the morning and he's very hungry and he's scratching his belly saying, I need something to eat. His brain's going to release just a hit of dopamine to make him motivated to look around for something to eat. That is a survival skill. He has got to find something to eat or he's dead. So it's going to say, hey, man, you should really look for something. He's like, all right. So he gets that little hit. He looks around and he sees a piece of yellow hanging on this tree over on the yonder. And he's like, wow, what's that? But as soon as he sees the yellow, his brain clicks and releases a hit of dopamine to say, go over there and check it out. And when he gets to the tree, he looks up and he says, I think that's edible. It looks like fruit. But he didn't know what fruit was. And as he looks up and sees it, the brain's going to release a little dopamine and say, you need to climb that tree and get that fruit. And then when he finally gets it, he gets another hit of dopamine from accomplishing the task. Task accomplishing used to be the old way of achieving dopamine for us. Now it's pleasure driven in our society. Explain that in a second. He gets that piece of fruit, and then when he eats it, it really releases a big hit of dopamine to reinforce we need to do that again. It is directly tied to your survival. If you don't do this, you might not be around. And that's really what we're centering. They call it I always mess up how you say this, the dopaminergic system from the nucleus accumbens up to the striatum. And, I hear these guys rattle off all these terms, and I'm like, that's why you're a doctor, and I'm not. But that's where we're centering, in the limbic system, deep down the middle of your skull here. That's all these processes. And it goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years since we've been here. This is why our species has been able to survive. If we did not have this mechanism to release that dopamine to tell us you need to go out and seek, you need to go out and conquer, you need to go out and get this other tribe's meat from them. If we did not have that, we would have all just died. So there's the basis for where addiction can come in and corrupt this system. Okay? Now, everything you do as an addict or an alcoholic is teaching the brain what to pay attention to. I was confused when I came into this field, and I did not understand that the brain does not control us. The way a neuroscientist told me, wrong or right, he said the brain is just another organ, like your heart or your liver. It doesn't really run you. You have your own mechanism of self that you say, I want to go get that. And when you walk over there, the brain is held hostage and has to go with you. And as you get exposed to things, the brain forms new neurons, which is a way of remembering things, and says, okay, what's that? That's a tree. I remember what a tree is. Oh, that's a car. I remember what that is. And it gets taught by what you do as to what is important in your world. The things you do the most, it's going to pay attention to the most because it wants to improve how you do it. It wants to help you do it better and better each time, whether that's playing golf, whether that's taking care of your kids, or whether that's working out. Anything you're doing, your brain is going to try to practice it and pay attention to say, how can I do that better next time, more efficiently, so I can get more of the dopamine quicker, et cetera, et cetera. So that's important because I was thinking of a term last night when I was thinking about today's topic, behavior modification. Now, if you have a pet and you don't want your dog to crap on the floor, you have done some behavior modification in some way to teach him that's not acceptable because his natural instincts don't understand why he can't do that. But you have taken actions to teach his brain. Again, action teaches the brain. What do we do? What's right? What's not right? And that behavior modification, as I tell my patients, is very dangerous because addiction is a very repetitive exercise. I used to have an old sponsor say, repetition, 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 repetition. Dr. Burns Brady, God rest his soul. He used to say that all the time. And the things you do the most are going to be your top priorities. Even if you say your kids are the top priorities. Even if you say this is your top. If work is the place you're at the most, you can kid yourself and say you love your kids as much as you want to. But your brain's going to believe work is the priority because that's what you've exposed it to the most. So this behavior modification I warn my patients about because there's two words you don't want your brain to do when it comes to addiction, and that is to adopt and adapt to the new behaviors. I've never heard anybody else say this. Maybe this is an original from me, but it's going to adopt these new behaviors, take it in and think it's normal. This is where he's going down to the dope man's house. First time you go, you're like, what am I doing? I shouldn't be here. And every fiber of your body is telling you, leave, run, you should not be here. Second time you go, not so bad. 20th time you go, you're like, hey, I know where to go. I know where to get stuff. And people say, aren't you scared? Oh man, it's just what we did. You see how the brain changed? It adopted and adapted to the new behavior. And again, adaptation, another mechanism of the human brain that has allowed us to survive. We would not be here without these mechanisms. So what happens? Well, as you adopt and adapt to this new behavior of drinking every night, eating Cheetos every weekend, whatever your pattern is, at that point, as I wrote down here, you're kind of screwed. Because the brain will change. And that is one piece of brain science we got in the last 20 years called plasticity, which revolutionized our total understanding about how the brain works. We used to think, and I was taught this when I first came into the field, the brain was pretty much formed by age 18 to 24, and it didn't really change that much after that. And then they threw all that out the window and said, boy, were we wrong. Your brain is changing up until the moment you take your last breath. based on what you're exposing it to. If you're exposing it to new things, it's changing, it's learning. And as the brain changes, therein lies where addiction starts to take hold. So let me see if I can put a summary point on this, because I know we've talked a lot about a lot of different angles on this. As you're doing these new behaviors, as your brain is getting this really massive hit of dopamine saying that was the most important thing, that's more important than your kids. I don't get that same hit of dopamine from my kids that I get from the methamphetamine. As you engage in the behaviors, as you do this repetitively, the whole system gets corrupted. Whereas it's meant to always go to a normal space and say, okay, I'm stable. The brain likes homeostasis. It likes to be in balance. It wants to go to a normal space. Now it's going to fight you because your new normal has become addiction. And when you try to stop, your brain's going to make you hurt. You're going to have cravings, you're going to have urges, you're going to have memories, you're going to have desires, and it's going to be like a fire on your brain saying, you're not doing what's normal. And why is that important to the brain? Because what's normal is stable. The brain wants you to be in homeostasis, in balance, so that there's no threats, and hopefully you'll stay alive. Well, now your new normal has become going to the dope house to get your stuff. And when you stop doing that, the brain is actually going to fight you on that. So the term they use in addiction science, which you really need to pay attention to probably more than anything else I've said today, is called hijacked. The entire system of the brain that has been used for thousands of years of survival, motivation, reward, survival, has been hijacked. And now this person is under the spell. It really is a spell of delusion that if I don't get my dope, I will die. I want you to hear that. There are people who will tell you, telling an addict or an alcoholic just to stop is like telling us to stop breathing. And you all hear that who are normal and say, well, that sounds like an excuse. And it sounds like, no, it's a reason. As you're watching them give up their kids to go and get another drink, it's not an excuse. It's a reason for why they're so sick to do that. Because what we do know with certainty is in their sober state, they would never hurt their kids. They would never give them up. And we see drug addicts and alcoholics do that all the time. That is the process of addiction changing the brain. Nowadays, we know with the advent of technology in your cell phone, the brain is being changed to speed up and try to keep up with all these cues and constant feed of technology into our head. With our poisoned food supply and ultra-processed foods, the brain is being changed to now expect more salt, more fat, more sugar. There is why addiction is so hard to change, because the brain doesn't know that anything's wrong. And the brain will actually fight you when you start to change. If you've been lazy your whole life and you've never been to the gym, and then you try to go to the gym the first time and work out, that is going to hurt. And your brain is going to say, why are we doing this? This hurts. This is not normal. However, if you had been working out for 10 years and then you laid off for a little bit, but then you bounced back, those memory markers would still be there and you'd probably recover pretty fast and be right back into working out. You see what I'm saying? What you do the most becomes your horror, so to speak. So when that brain gets hijacked and the normal processes get turned back on a person, I want you to hear that again. When you're dealing with an addict and alcoholic in your life and you're telling them not to use, their brain is telling them, I got to get out of here. If I don't get out here and get this stuff, I'm at threat. I'm under threat. I'm in danger. And if I don't get this, I could die. And you're sitting there pulling your hair out going, I don't understand. What the hell has happened to my son? What the hell has happened to my daughter? So the good news, we can change this with plasticity. That's kind of our salvation. The brain likes to change. The brain likes new things. We can totally change the brain. We can reprogram the system. But again, it's going to fight you. And I got a perfect example of this to teach you all today from my home group on Tuesday night. I was talking to a fellow who is extremely cut. And he's a martial artist. And he's been training his whole life as a martial artist. And he was having a hard time because he was acting like an addict or like an alcoholic in his early recovery. That's what we do. Our brain still hasn't gotten the programming yet. So he was getting down on himself. And I felt needed to pull up on him after the meeting. I said, man, you're being really hard on yourself. You're trying to change things that have taken place over years of training. And just like when you're training a new dog, don't beat its ass too hard the first time. Just sort of work with it a little bit to help it to change. And he still wasn't getting me. So then this analogy came to my brain. I said, okay, my friend, do me a favor. Do not react, because if you react, you're going to hurt me. I said, but I'll bet if I throw a punch at you like this, your arm is going to come up in muscle memory and block it off before I even know what happened. Is that correct? He goes, oh, yeah. I said, that is addiction. Muscle memory that has no reason. It's not thinking things through. It's just freaking saying go. And I said, let me ask you this. If you have trained a routine to be a certain way where you work your body this way, and I tell you, nope, we're going to switch it up. Even though you've been doing this for 10 years, now I want you to use your left hand. How hard would that be to fight your body that it wants to use the right hand instead of the left hand? He goes, I got it. And I said, yep, that's what every addiction, again, cell phone, food, gambling, that's what we're dealing with, is that it becomes your new normal, and we need to input new actions and new behaviors to change you to another normal. Okay? Otherwise, that muscle memory will do what it's going to do. I always tell my patients, man, if you're not doing any action to change, you're doomed. You know, a lot of them come to group and they think spending 3 hours in a Zoom meeting is going to change them. And I'm like, no, you have to take your brain and put it into a different place. Get in your car and go to a different place. Go meet new people. And all that novelty, which the brain loves, will be about the brain will pay attention. Like, what are we doing? We're supposed to be at the dope man's house. What are we doing at the meeting? And that's what changes the brain, is reprogramming, okay? So, I can read my own handwriting. All right, let me touch on one other area of the brain science. But remember those points, especially if you have someone in your life that you love, that you just want to. I want to give you some solace. I want to give you some compassion. The normal response, we get these nurses that come in to train, and they sit in our groups. And I always love to ask one of them, because I only get one at a time. I'll say, you know, who in your family or who your friends is an addict alcoholic? And the ones that say nobody, I'm starting to look at them like, I think it's you. Because everybody knows somebody who's struggling with some form of addiction. Like I said, food, whatever it is. I mean, look at our culture out there. Look at this guy. We all have weight issues and deal with this food supply. The normal response, here's your compassion hit. The normal response is to want to punch him. And I'll tell these nurses that. And I said, look, you're going to be in a profession where you're going to run into a lot of ex-alcoholics, and they're going to drive you to your wit's end. You're going to first have the response that you want to pull every hair out on your head. And then you're going to have the response that you just want to punch them. Now, don't do that, because you will lose your license. But that's okay. Process that with someone. Talk to somebody. Vent that out. Don't give that to the addict. Every time you come down on the addict and give them that, you're driving a wedge between you all, and you're pushing them away from any possible connection they had to you. If you had a connection with your son and addiction is destroying that, every time you yell at your son, that wedge is getting wider. And the more that person doesn't have connection with a human being, they are literally getting more connection with their dope. So we don't want to make them die. And we're not going to tolerate their behaviors. We'll talk more about that in another day with codependency, etc. But if you're feeling like you don't know what to do and you're getting mad at even what I'm sharing because it sounds like I'm being too compassionate to the addict, that's a normal response. I had an alcoholic father. I totally get that. So you're in the right place. But I want to touch on this last piece, especially for anybody that's working with a newcomer as a sponsee, or if you have a group where you're working with new people, or like I said, if you've got a new addict in your life who's new in recovery. Why are they so dumb? This is a concept that me and my buddies kick around a lot, and we'll just go, fucking, well, stupid newcomer, right? Let's just be like, what are they thinking? They walked right into that, and it blew up, and now they're in jail, and they're like, what? Well, there's a reason for this. Scientifically, brain science. We have this sections of our brain, and it's funny how the only part of our brain that has evolved throughout our human history is the cortex and the prefrontal cortex, to the point where we have now become a more advanced species. Other parts of the brain have changed, but they've not had the revolutionary change that took place in the front part of your brain. This is called your executive functioning. It's called your higher reasoning. This is where you make your decisions. This guy is designed to pump the brakes on everything that you do. So when you're deciding to do something, it has to go through this office up here before you can actually do it. Okay, so the front part of your brain, thank God for it. We have air conditioning, we have internet, but without the cortex and prefrontal cortex evolving, we'd still be living in caves. That's good. In the middle part of your brain, you got this thing called the limbic system. And the limbic system doesn't care what the consequences are. It just wants to act. It desires things. It says, go get that. Go do this. I don't care. It's not going to think it through. So it will send a message up to the front office and say, I want to do this. I want to go get high. And then if the cortex is working correctly, the cortex will send the message back and say, slow down. Let me pump the brakes. Are you sure you want to do that? It's not going to control it. It's just going to question it. Are you sure you want to do that? And then this limbic system, a 15-year-old punk, think about that if you have a teenager in your life. Yeah, I don't care. Let's do it. And still, the cortex is going to pump the brakes and create this feedback loop. If you have been hearing voices in your head, that is normal. Every person does. Every day, every moment of your life, you're having a discussion in your head between, I want that extra piece of cake, but I'm supposed to be on a diet. I want to go be with her, but I'm married. I want to quit my job and punch my boss, but I need my paycheck. All day long. And this guy is what's keeping you out of jail. This guy is keeping you out of trouble. Problem is, number one part of the brain that's affected the worst by alcohol and drug use long term is the cortex, your cognitive abilities. You become dumber than a box of rocks. You are anesthetizing this part of your brain, which you need desperately to be able to discern what is a good idea and what is a bad idea. And when you do this long enough, you will have long-term damage such as dementia, leading to Alzheimer's, chronic brain damage. It's horrible. And I can tell, I'll get a person in my group, I've got a nose for this. If they come in and they're slurring their words or they're tangential and what they're saying doesn't make sense and they're bouncing around, and usually from alcohol. Sorry to tell you, folks, our number one legal drug is the worst for the brain besides methamphetamine. On the list of all the worst drugs you can do for your brain, alcohol is at the top, and meth is just over that because it's made by people and we don't know what they're putting in it. Could be radiator fluid, could be battery acid, who knows what they're putting in it, and that's why that's on the top. So over long term, they've anesthetized that brain that they can't make good decisions. So here they're in recovery for a month, and you're expecting them to act logically. And as I tell my patients, if you argue with a crazy person, that kind of makes you crazy, right? But it's very human. You're going to do that. But again, not an excuse, but a reason. When you see people that you think should be doing right, and then they make a terrible decision to expose themselves to a trigger. We're getting ready to have Derby weekend here in grand old Louisville this weekend. And I guarantee it, several of my patients who are barely sober are going to expose themselves to a situation they should not expose themselves to. And they'll think, I don't know. I guess I thought it was a good idea. And they're not dumb. You'll call them dumb. That's no good. They're brain damaged. You need to understand that they are brain damaged. Now, if they have not gone past a certain point, and that's what I can tell you I get a nose for, I can sniff out when somebody's like, I'm not sure they're coming back from that. Generally, though, the majority of people, if you quit soon enough, your brain has amazing healing, restorative powers. You'll get your power to reason back, and you won't act like a fool the rest of your life. But I felt like I needed to touch on that because I don't think that's talked about enough in our society about why addicts and alcoholics. I mean, how many times you hear that on the news or on talk shows? It's like, why are they doing all this? Why did you do this with their kids? No compassion at all. They just want to be angry at them. Like I said, punishment, incarceration, and sometimes death. In the old days, they'll just hang us for our behavior. So that's our topic for the day on addiction. If you'd like to flesh that out more, please feel free to send us questions to the iam12recovery@gmail.com. iam12recovery@gmail.com. And we can go as deep as you want. But like I say, we're trying to do like an opener and an overview topic, and then we'll do discussion, and then we want to have your questions as well. So hope that helped. Dan, any thoughts on that? Dan the man has walked this path with me, and he's seen some really bizarre addict behavior over his time. So anything I said that touched a button or hit anything with you?
Well, yeah, first of all, just to go back to your intro on people, I hear this all the time too, and I know that you do, that people, however you are dialoguing with this, people are hearing it. And that was one of the main reasons we're sitting here, because if these people are running through your groups having that, how many people are out there not getting the opportunity to hear you? And, frankly, I didn't either. Other than just our day-to-day talking, but I have never really sat and listened to like something like today. This is my first time hearing
Juice.
a real full thing. So it just juices me up, and it does it. After 10 years of playing around here, when 10 years of knowing you and being able to digest, pull off of you in our daily discussions on how to help people better and what's going on with people, that it makes a ton of sense, man. And thank you for that. This is going to be fun from that standpoint too, because people get to sit, people come back to your groups in what you call aftercare, right? That was this morning for years. And they're coming in there because they get a chance once a week to sit and listen to you. And they don't miss it. Guys are like, man, I was out of town or I was something vacation and they had to miss it. And people that I know will always bring that up as a regret for the week that they missed your group because they had that one chance a week to come soak some of this stuff up.
Yeah, and we want this to be a relaxed environment in here, and so I hope everybody will realize this is our first attempt at this, so I'm a little stiff even today.
Yeah. Well, I see it
nerve-wracked.
Loosening up as it goes. With my podcast, the same thing happens in the beginning where you're a little tight, and then you get it rolling, and everything loosens up. You forget about the camera and the microphones. That brain damage thing is really touched me probably, and that's something else that from being around here, one of the things that I've heard a number of times, and it happened to me specifically, is that there's a time, and it's different for everybody, but that neuroplasticity starts taking hold of the new way of going, and all of a sudden you feel like you're firing on an extra cylinder or two. If you had a V8 all your life, man, you thought, well, all I want is my V8 back. And the next thing you know, man, you feel like you're running on 10 cylinders. And guys, become, I can find it now. I have more energy and more mental energy to do way more things than, back when you thought you were just peeling out. Burning, as the big book says, burning energy foolishly, and you're shot by 5 p.m. and the only thing you want to do is drink the rest of the night.
Can I touch on that real
Sure.
quick? Because that is another aspect of what makes recovery so hard. I told you the brain is going to fight you, right? Well, we also have this aspect that if you're using too many chemicals, your brain will turn off all of its natural pain relieving mechanisms and all of its natural pleasure mechanisms to make you feel okay. So most people in early recovery can't stand it. They'll tell you, I feel so blah. I feel so bland. Everything's boring. I can't do this. If this is the way my life is going to be, I'd just rather use, even though they know it's going to kill them. And I have to convince them, if you'll just hang on a few weeks and you do some tools, it'll come sooner. You will get this shot, and you're describing it. You describe the intellectual part that they say, well, I got all 8 cylinders. But there's also that shot of, I feel good.
You just feel good.
You see these guys come in, and they're high as you couldn't believe.
Yeah.
And you're like, I had a guy in my group today. He's been with me 6 weeks. So he's hitting that wall where he's doing everything we're asking him to do. And he's like a 5-year-old little kid.
Yep.
He's so excited. That's the happy, joyous, and free state we want to get people back to.
Yeah, and a tough thing to get people to do is, like you said in there, the harder they work at that, the more energy they put to rewiring that. Like you said, just an hour a day. Don't expect to get that too soon, man. But if you bust it and you get your life, totally involved in participating in your recovery for many hours every day, you'll see that wall. You'll jump over that wall sooner. And I see it all the time, from people. And the other thing, you will actually feel physical pain. You didn't mention, you were talking about a lot of the feeling bad kind of thing. You will actually freaking hurt, especially if something's been like an opiate or something like that's been your drug, a kind of a traditional painkiller kind of drug. Your body will hurt you. And in order to get, or your brain or something's going on there, because I have gone through it, it will put physical pain into you to get you to go back and get some more of that, what works. And man, as soon as you do, boom, it's gone. I'm convinced today that some of that was a phantom pain. It was just all in my head. There wasn't really anything hurting. My brain was just demanding to have some of what it used to get.
And by the way, folks, this will be sort of a standing joke until hopefully you guys like and subscribe enough. We hope to eventually get a second camera so Dan doesn't have to be relegated to the prison. We put him in a little jail cell. We should run a little. We should run one of those marathons they have on KET where we're going to try to get Dan out of jail and get him his own camera. So eventually you'll get. But if you want to see him, you can also. Yeah. I'll save it for the ad. But he has his own podcast too. I'll give you that in a little bit.
Yeah, I am totally looking forward to what we got going here, and I just really, really love to sit here and soak up your edumacation.
I got that, and I'd say product of the Jefferson County school system, but really where I got that word was old Bugs Bunny cartoons.
right,
They used to say, my education. I got my education.
Yeah, I grew up with that.
And again, it's just about keeping it light. We are talking about such a serious, dark, and I deal with that darkness every day. If you don't have a sense of humor about this, you won't survive it. And for anybody dealing with someone in your life that has it, you've got to get away from them and don't let their darkness consume you. You've got to go towards the light, have some fun, laugh, and don't think about them 24 hours a day. We'll help you with that codependency down the road in another episode. But I hope that has brought some clarity as to why, this was baffling to Bill Wilson and is baffling to his doctors. It's like, he walks out the door and he says he's never going to do it again. He says, I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to lose my wife. I don't want to be homeless, which he was virtually. And I don't want to be jobless, which he couldn't get a job. And it was killing him. That shame and guilt was killing him. And when he told Dr. Sokorth when he was leaving, I'm not touching it, he meant it. And he would literally, this is from the history, walk down the street, turn the corner, walk down the street, and walk into a bar. And he'd be back that night, drunk and acting like a fool, fighting the nurses, punching nurses. This is not the man he was. That's what we're dealing with. When I hope what you got today is it's a mental disorder, a brain disorder, a disorder of the brain, if you prefer that terminology. You don't have to say you're mentally crazy, but you kind of are. We'll talk about that in the next episode. But for now, addiction corrupts the brain and changes it. And just like other, the liver has great restorative mechanisms, the brain has better restorative systems than the liver does, actually. So some people might argue with me about that, but I'm telling you, I've seen some miracle stories of people coming back from where they were just like a vegetable when they walked in, and now they're holding jobs and being a reasonable member of society. So there is hope out there. So. All right, welcome back. We are here at the questions portion of our show today. And like I said, please send us questions. We want to hear from you. And no question is too dumb, except not asking it. That's my opinion, and I'll stick to it. All right, we have 3 questions to go over today. Thank you, folks, for sending these in. 2-part question, it says. First part, alcoholism is prevalent on both sides of my extended family and my immediate family. My father is an alcoholic, and I am a recovering alcoholic, although it took me several relapses, taking my family along the ride for me to figure that out. And now my younger sister is struggling, has had some major consequences from her drinking. Unfortunately, she won't admit that she has a problem, and my family doesn't want to see it as a problem. Even with all the years and experiences with my family going through this, my older sister still says about her other sister, she needs to get her SHIT together. Like I said, what I said earlier, pull your hair out, want to punch him? That's the normal reaction. Is there a way to help family members understand either alcoholism as a disease or that alcoholism and addiction is not a question of willpower? I guess addicts even struggle for a long time trying to understand that it's not about willpower. So how do you get anyone to understand that it's not about willpower? Well, you just opened up a whole can of wax there, because when we're dealing with our families, first of all, my heart goes out to you. It's really hard to have a loved one dealing with this disease. I suffered for many years with my father, watching him decline and then watching him die from this. And you're so powerless. We talk about that in the program, that I'm powerless about my own addiction, and I'm powerless to try and cure someone else's. And it really hits home when you're watching somebody die before your eyes and there's not anything you could do. On a side note, I meant to mention this earlier. My friend told me a story yesterday which kind of exemplifies what you're up against. His father is dying from alcoholism, and he was just in the hospital from a stroke because of it. And they're sending him to a nursing home, not back home. He's going to a nursing home because he's really messed up. And he calls my friend to complain that the hospital won't send over his bag to the nursing home. So my friend gets all up and says, well, I'm going to call and find out what's going on. So he calls over there. And it turns out the reason they wouldn't send it is because it has bottles of vodka and bourbon in the bag. And that's the stuff that's killing him. And yet he's mad that that's what he wants. And so my friend sat on it.
Go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah, if you need to clear it again.
Sorry about that. My friend sat on that for a while before acting, and about half hour later, he gets a call from his dad saying, "Oh, everything's fine now. My friend Joe brought me a couple of new bottles, so I'm just fine. I'll be fine in a minute here." That's the madness of the brain, thinking I have to have this, even though this man is on his deathbed. Think about that, folks. So how do I help my family to understand it's not an issue of willpower? You can't force someone to learn if they're not willing to learn. There is a thing called ignorance, and then there's this thing called willful ignorance, where a person is either so mad they can't see straight or so much in denial that they just don't want to admit that there's something wrong. Possibly a lot of times because it will reflect badly on the family. But I will tell you the most common dynamic is when a parent does that, they actually internalize, well, if my child's an addict, I must have done something wrong. I wasn't a good parent. And that's so unbearable to feel that they will pretend everything is fine. I love two tools. I always try to educate people, as you can see. So if you can find a video like this or anyone that you feel like you could get them to watch for just, what you do is you find something that's perfect on the way you want to have them hear it. So maybe in the future we'll talk more deeply about willpower. And if it's concise enough, I prefer 10 minutes. Just say, here, I'm going to send this to you. If you care at all for her, if you even care just the littlest bit for her, would you be willing to spend 10 minutes just to watch this? And then I can answer any questions you have. And if they watch it and they choose to continue to believe what they believe, you cannot have power. You cannot change that. But I also like this really strong tool that I've found to work the best for my patients, and that is to invite them to come to your meeting. And especially in our group, if you invite them to come on birthday night. There is this block in their head because of anger, because of the emotions, as I said before, that they cannot hear you say it. But when they go to a meeting and they hear some stranger, and you'll be mad because you've been telling us for a year, and they'll come out of there and say, well, this guy over here said this, and it made a lot of sense. And it's like, I've been saying the same thing for decades. They just can't hear it. That's the old biblical phrase, a prophet is never honored in his own land. My spiritual teacher taught me that. So, yeah, your own family's not going to listen to you. But if you can bring them to the meeting, let them see recovery, let them see people successfully saying one thing, I was this way, which sounds like your sister. I couldn't get up. I was having these problems, blah, 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 and now look at me now. Then they might put the dots together like, oh, wow, this is what works. Not yelling at them, not telling them they're a piece of shit. Now, if they're willing to listen at all, another aspect you can try as well is to say, I know you don't understand this, but I know what it's like to be in her shoes. And every time someone talked to me like that, it made me feel bad about myself. And when I felt more bad about myself, it made me drink more. So I know you don't mean to do this, but every time you come at them with that energy, you're feeding their addiction so that they're going to actually drink more. And I know that's not what you want them to do. I know how hard it is to love people. If you want to watch a really great video on YouTube, there's a video I use all the time in my group. It's called Everything You Know About Addiction is Wrong. And he talks about that aspect that we've been incarcerating and punishing people, and he found that trying to love them is much more productive. Not that we tolerate the behavior. You set a very firm boundary and you say, I'm not going to help you stay sick. I'm not going to help you get sicker. If you're going to persist in these behaviors, you need to leave. You need to go somewhere else. But I am here for you the second you decide you want help, the second you want to get better. I will take you wherever we need to go, and I will do everything I can in my power to help you. But I am not going to feed your disease. And I've done that with many people. And surprisingly, as clouded as they might be in their delusion, they kind of click with that and they kind of go, okay. They still want some money for dope, but they'll still kind of like go, well, that makes sense, I guess. So, and also use your supports. That's probably the number one tool I teach all my guys. We got to lean on each other while we're dealing with this sickness. That is the only way I've been able to be a counselor for 21 years. The burnout in my field, ask any drug and alcohol counselor, is 5 years. It amazes me that I've been able to last this long. But I have a pretty good toolkit that I lean on and a pretty damn good support group that I lean on every day. I call them right when I get out of the treatment center and I'm like, ah! So use your supports and get that energy off of you. Your sister's journey is your sister's journey. Your other sister's journey is her journey. Your mother's journey is her journey. And when we get too far off our side of the street and we're trying to go over there and fix that, then we're slipping into codependency. We need to let go and trust higher power. But if there's anything you can do on your part, keep telling your sister that you love her. I love you no matter what happens. Even if you decide to keep using I love you. It's really hard to do. But try that. See if that helps. But I thank you so much for the question. All right, second question of 3. I have a little over 7.5 years of sobriety, and I have 2 alcoholic parents. I have made amends to both of them, but I have not talked to my mom in about 4 years because I made the decision to stop calling or have any contact because it seemed that I was the only one trying to have a relationship. And every time we had a conversation, it was still full of toxic energy. She has not tried to contact me or my wife or even my kids ever since I last talked to her. My children have neither been to their houses, not been to her house, neither has she been to our house. Not once in their lives. Wow, that's sad. Sorry about that, brother. And I feel that my children have a real void in their lives because of not having their grandparents around. Also, on the other hand, I feel as if I'm truly protecting them from a lot of pain and false teachings and baggage that I've worked so hard to disconnect from and deprogram myself. So I was just wondering if I am actually doing the right thing because my heart is saying yes, but my alcoholic mind is bugging me saying no. Thanks again for any insights. Wow, what a great question. I appreciate that. And thanks for all the details. The more details you send me, guys, don't send me 5 pages, but the more details helps me flesh out because that's the first thing a therapist does is bouncing back and says, well, what about this? What about this? I always say protect the children first. Protect the children, protect the children, protect the children. The poor young children are the worst casualties of this disease, and I was one too. And their brains are so vulnerable, and their bodies and minds and emotions are so sponge-like. You got to keep them away from that negative, toxic energy. So if you're doing it on that basis alone, I would say that's a sound decision. It's sad, and I know you regret not having their grandparent in their life. If you can have conversations with them to say, look, I don't want to prevent you to see your grandparent if that's what you want to do, but I want you to know that it might not be a positive experience because this is the way I've experienced your grandparent. Then there's another issue about whether you need to separate your issues from whether or not she could treat your grandchildren different. I don't know if you didn't say that your mother was an addict alcoholic, but maybe she's so sick with the effects of codependency over the years. Just a preview on our codependency episode. It is a real illness, and it drives people into the mental institution. Living with toxic, negative, dark, alcoholic addict energy will destroy you. So she's probably not healed, which is sad because you tried to make your amends and you did your part. And that's kind of what the book says. If we've done our part, we have to let it go at that. I wouldn't be adverse that if you felt some Christmas or special occasion or birthday, if you wanted to make an overture of either a letter or an email or a call to say, I just want you to know I was thinking about you and I'm really regretting that I don't get to see you as much. And you could get a gauge on her energy. If she starts up right again with that same old stuff, you can kind of go, all right, validation. Now I know why I'm doing this. I have friends, people in my life where I've done that and I get validation right away and I'm like, oh, that's why I'm staying away because I can't deal with that. That's not healthy for me. Or, I always hold out the hope that people change. I'm a counselor, so of course I'm going to always think, let's see what happens. Maybe she can heal and change. Maybe she's had second thoughts and maybe she's waiting for someone else to make the first move. That is one cool thing about recovery is that we get a courage, we get a strength that we didn't have before with higher power, where we can be the ones to make the first move, right? What do you got to lose? What's the worst you're going to do? Yell at you? I don't think that would really affect your sobriety. And if it did, you can always call your sponsor. So ponder on it, pray on it, talk to your supports. But if you feel like maybe you're getting this inkling, and I try to pay attention to inklings, I'm a guy that's convinced that we have a sixth sense, and most people would agree with this, you just don't think about it. It's our intuition. That little voice inside that's always talking to you saying, go here, go there, don't go there. And if you follow it, And I tried to, like, on the way over here, it was telling me, why don't you get in the right lane and slow down? And I didn't see a speed trap, but I know if I had gotten popped for a ticket, it would have said, you should have listened to your intuition. So I'm saying, if you're getting that little voice inside that's saying, maybe it's time I should try again. And then at least you'll have that closure where you'll be able to say, I made my best effort and it just is not workable. And then you don't have that wondering. Okay? I hope that helps. But again, just to emphasize the number one point, if you're protecting your kids, God bless you. In this world we have today, please, everybody out there, protect the kids. Lordy, protect the kids. That's number one over everything else. So thank you for that question so much. Appreciate you. And do follow-ups too. If you all hear answers and you want to follow up with other points, we can always do that as well. All right, last question for this episode. How do I deal with a family member such as my brother who's claiming to be sober and yet all of his actions still point to the fact that he's still using? What do I do when he reaches out to me through my mother for money while he's in jail? I get what you're saying there. In other words, translation, he's using his mom's codependency to say, will you ask this person if he'll send me some money since you don't have it? So he's going to put her up to it, do the dirty work. How do I deal with this manipulation coming from my mother also about how I'm raising my own kids or how I'm living my own life today because it's not up to her standards or the way she would do things, et cetera, et cetera. But most of all, what do I do about my brother who's lying and using my mother? And I know he's still using, but that's a tough one. That's on the same level as of watching a person die, I think, is watching another member being taken advantage of in your family through alcoholic manipulation, through lies, cheating, stealing. I was just watching that movie Requiem for a Dream the other night. I was just dropping in. I was channel surfing. One of the best movies on addiction ever. Don't watch it if you're faint of heart. It really paints a picture of what addiction's like for the people that suffer. And this woman is going down to the little local shop down there. Ellen Burstyn, she's the lead from The Exorcist, and she's going down to the shop to buy the television set back that her son hocked. And the old man says, "Can I ask you a question?" She says, "Yeah." And he says, "How long have we known each other?" She says, "Oh, 20 years or so." And he goes, "Why do you do this? Why do you buy?" And he goes, "Well, he's my only boy. If I didn't have him, I wouldn't have anybody." And that's a valid reason. I can totally understand her doing that because she doesn't want to lose him. Maybe her mother's doing that because she's afraid if I don't, he might die. A lot of parents fall into that trap. If I don't help him feed his addiction, and they believe the threats that the addict is saying, if you don't give it to me, I might hurt myself, or I can't get through the night. And she's trying to act with her best intentions, even though she might know it's not the right thing to do. The main thing I would suggest as a sponsor, if I was sponsoring you, is try not to get in the middle of that. That is a SHIT storm waiting to just eat you up. Because you've got two parties there. You've got your brother's addiction, which is saying, just feed me. And then you got your mom saying, no, wait a minute. You're saying all this about your brother, but I don't know if that's true or not. And then you're going to have to defend being wrong against two people. So, I'm a fan of speaking our piece once. You know, if you're going to tell her, hey, I see this happening. I don't like the way it's affecting you. I worry that he's taking advantage of you. It's your decision if you choose to continue to support him or believe him. But I'm not going to give him any money because I know he's going to just use it to help him die. So in that way, you're speaking your piece, but you're not telling her what to do. That's where we cross that line off my side of the street, and I'm going to come over here and say, well, this is wrong, and you should be doing it this way. Try to stay out of any statements about what she's doing. Try to keep it more on, I see this, and I feel sorry and sad, and it hurts me to watch you hurt with his behaviors. And then you've spoken your piece. And like I said to the person who wrote the letter before you, you have at least that closure that I did the part that I could, and the rest of it I need to let go. There's an overall rule we have in recovery when it comes to navigating what's not on my side of the street. And that is this phrase, we have to quit playing God. I didn't realize what this meant when I first came in, but I've learned its depth ever since I've been sober for 40 years. And that is, anytime I get on my high horse and I think I know the way a certain person is supposed to be acting, or the way another person is supposed to live or die, or whether or not the world is the way it's supposed to be, right? I don't accept this world and all those crazy people and all this stuff. Who am I to know that's actually not the exact way it's supposed to be? Because of why? Because maybe through this terrible time may create a period of transformation where we come into a new age and people are better. Human beings always have to suffer and go through pain before we get to the better, right? So maybe I don't have all the answers. And maybe what I think isn't the right way. Maybe your brother's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing in his journey so that he can get well. He needs to hit bottoms. Maybe your mom's doing exactly what she needs to do in her journey to hit bottoms, to either seek help or not seek help. I have had to totally accept that about my people I love the most in my life, that they're going to do what they're going to do, and I have to respect that they have the right to do that. I would not want them interfering with what I do or telling me what I'm doing, even when I was using. So I have to try and do the same thing. I know it hurts, but again, as I said to the other fellow, this will probably be a theme for all the episodes. Lean on your supports, lean on your supports, lean on your supports, and always get your venting out before you act. Always. Call, bitch, moan, cry, yell, whatever you do, and then you can make a rational decision. When emotions override the intellect, that's like that limbic system jumping in saying, I don't care, I'm just going to go over there and tell them what's up. Let's slow that down a little bit and take a pause. So, great questions this week, guys. I appreciate it. For anybody else who wants to join us again on this, it's IAM12 recovery, the word recovery, IAM12 recovery at gmail.com. Fill up that inbox. And we will answer as many of your questions this week as you want to send in. So, any thoughts on any of those things, Dan? That you're a sponsor and you have a lot of seasoning when it comes to dealing with family issues and.
I know that the deal where I have to get my mind around that this just may be their journey, and there's absolutely, that's the chief powerlessness. We're powerless over our disease and over theirs, and who knows what's going on in both higher power. That that always brought me down a bunch, because then I have a fix-it switch in me that wants, I think a lot of us do, that wants to jump in and fix things, and just say, got some recovery under my belt, so I know a few things, and I think I can come in and do something helpful. And a lot of times that's when I know I have to step back. It's just I'll be muddling in and getting in the business of other things that is not any of my business to be in. And over again, you talked about, I had something, and I've said it a few times on my podcast, that discharging the negative energy to the universe through safe people. And that safe people is the key. If you've got people that are, you said lean on your supports, that's the same thing. Can't tell you how many times that I've vented on something, or and it may be even not really even a vent, but it could be that, and I arrive at my I know what to do just from talking it out with my sponsor or with my friend, just by verbalizing it. It'll come to me that go, okay, yeah, now I know what that's the right.
Sort of emerges, it
does.
To the top. It's really
I know it is, and I tell people that all the time. My people I sponsor, about keeping me in their decisions, in the loop for their decisions, the decisions they're making, especially big ones. And it's not because I'm going to tell you what to do. That's the furthest thing from what I'm doing. You will make a better decision because you took that action of talking it out. Oh. It's just those two things in particular, but you can't lean on your community enough, and that's another one of those, as you said in the education part of the isolation. That's what we want to do, and it's one of the reasons why, as a sponsor, some of my assignments are to call people, force them into, I don't know what to say. Don't worry about it. My guy will. No, he'll talk to you. You have to. Here's what you can say. My dumb sponsor told me I had to call you.
I tell him that too. I say, my sponsor is making me do this.
Yeah, and don't worry about it, because the guys I'm having you call will pick up the ball right then, and it won't be any problem. And then they'll call back and tell me about it. I talked to so and so today. Man, we've had a really good conversation. So, yeah, well, how about that? But yes, lean on support. I don't know how. It's just so valuable every day. I thank God for the fellowship that He's surrounded me with. I just feel like I have the best bunch of. I can't imagine having a better bunch of guys walking this battle buddies, walking this path with me as I do. It's unbelievable. Miracle
this
recovery.
Guy in this video about everything you know about addiction is wrong talks about how over time, it's trended that we have more ways to connect and more technology and ways to connect, but we have less real contacts. Like, because he says the real people that are going to be there are going to be in person in front of you, right? The real people that are in your life, not your likes, not your followers, not your Facebook friends. And he says, so it's trended so that people have less of those supports over the decades and higher square footage in their houses.
Oh, yeah.
And so is this the correlation between being isolated, and we have traded stuff for this sense of community.
Yeah, square foot
and when we
and
lived
stuff.
in tribes, hell, the guy was right next to you all
Yeah,
day long.
y'all
You
were-
could lean over and say, hey, man, I'm having this problem with my girlfriend. What should I do with that? You know? And without objective reasoning, all you've got is this little squirrely brain going over the same things over and over. I think I should do this, or maybe I should do this. Or this. You're not getting anything more. You've got to reach out to get that objective voice. Boy, is that magical.
Yep,
That
it is.
changes everything.
Really, really does. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great podcast, and if y'all want to hear more from our friend Dan the Man, he has his own podcast called The Spiritual Underground, available at all podcast providers. The Spiritual Underground with Dan Reeves, Reeves.
It's technically the Spiritual Underground podcast, but you'll get there if you get Spiritual Underground and you're looking for that.
Add the duh.
Yeah.
But he has over 300 episodes, and he has been interviewing addicts and alcoholics about their stories in the Louisville area.
For 6 years.
6 years. Wow. Time flies. And he also has people who come in from all over the country and talk about way outside topics that are maybe a little stretchy for your thoughts. But they're great. They're all about spirituality. They're all about growing and developing. So please check that out if you want other supports. It's a great resource. And boy, if you're in early recovery, and we were talking about taking action, and that's what's going to change the brain. We have this idea like, oh, so I'm supposed to sit in a meeting all day long? No, you're an idiot, dude. If you read, that's taking action. If you listen to a podcast, that's taking action. You're telling me you can't put, this is literally what I have to fight with my patients with. This is how sick they are. You're telling me over the weekend, you cannot find an opportunity to put in your earbuds while you vacuum and listen to 20 minutes of it, and they can't even do that.
Yep. On the way to work, on the way back home.
Astonishing.
Yep.
I'm too busy. I got too much going on. It's like, wait a minute. Participating in your recovery takes on many forms. Try to open your mind about that.
And the whole reason I do the podcast is because of, or a big reason I do the podcast is because how valuable recovery audio was to me in my early recovery. I just stopped listening to everything else because music and TV shows and sports and everything else took me back and tripped me back into that, you know, how, like you said, my mind had connected baseball with drinking, music with drinking, comedy on, sitcoms on, and at Thursday night at 8 o'clock, and all that stuff was all piled together, and I just started listening to all day long recovery audio, and it helped rewire me quicker. You know, I was listening to people using these very tools to get better, and they did it in a humorous. You know, but sometimes, you know, you get to hear the worst part of it too, but it would always come in with the humor too. So just as what I think is a key to the way you deliver things and the way you talk about it, you still keep it to where it's fun to do. And recovery is fun. It can be fun. It's tough at the beginning to get that through, but I've never had more fun in my life.
So if anybody out there is struggling and you're listening to this, just keep an open mind. And I promise you, after a few episodes here, I hope some of it will start to make sense. It's not your fault. If I could end on anything today, that's one of the most powerful phrases that our friend Matthew Perry, the actor, left us with. Matthew Perry, the actor from Friends, who was sober for a while and then lost his fight. In my opinion, because a doctor gave him the wrong drugs to help him stay sober. But he has this video where he says, I'm walking out of the doctor's office. He says, just remember, it's not your fault. And I said, what? He goes, it's not your fault. He goes, wait a minute, say it one more time. And the doctor said, it's not your fault. That's a different message than telling them you're to blame. You're doing this on purpose. If you loved us more, you'd stop. Think about it. It's not their fault if their brain gets corrupted and is hijacked. They don't even know they're sick. So if you're suffering out there, give yourself that break today. Take a little bit of guilt and shame off yourself, and recovery is waiting for you on the other side of the fence. So thank you all for joining us. We always close in my group in the usual fashion, so I think we'll try that today. If you don't mind, Dan, joining me in the Serenity Prayer, let's close with that.
All right.
All right. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you die if you don't. Woo! That's what we do in my group. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for joining us.